When does something change enough that it becomes a new thing? One of the classic examples is a lump of clay. Consider that I have a lump of clay before me, and I mold that lump of clay into a bust of Abraham Lincoln. And it sits there on the table for a few days, and then I decide that it wasn't a very good bust of Abraham Lincoln. And so I mold the clay again and I make a vase. Now it seems like the bust of Abraham Lincoln has gone out of existence and that now a vase has come into existence. That is, we think that the change is great enough between the lump of clay as Abraham Lincoln and the lump of clay as the vase is different enough that we have two different objects. Well, one question we could raise is about the material composition. It's the same lump of clay, only in different forms. So the lump of clay must have existed throughout that time, even though there was a time when it had the shape of Abraham Lincoln's head, and at another time it had the shape of a vase. Keep this image, or keep this idea of the lump of clay being molded into different shapes in the back of your head. It's something that we'll come back to much later in the semester. But does it take such a radical change for something to become something else? I mean, when I have a piece of raw chicken and I use that piece of raw chicken to make chicken Alfredo, for example, has the chicken become something else? I mean, it certainly changed its properties. If I ate the raw chicken, I would risk getting salmonella. But if it's properly cooked, the proteins have changed, and the risk of salmonella is gone. So it seems like the cooked chicken is different enough from the raw chicken that we have something new. We have a piece of cooked chicken. Now, what about more subtle differences? So, for example, if I go from sitting to standing, I've also changed. Now, all this relates back to Leibniz's law, or the identity of indiscernibles, which we talked about earlier. So Leibniz's law basically states that x is identical, it is the same thing as y, if and only if x shares all of the properties which y has, and x possesses no properties which y does not have. Basically, that's just a very rigorous way of saying that they are exactly the same in every single way. And the only thing that can be exactly the same in every single way is itself. So there's no one like me except for me in every single way. Now, right now I have a series of properties. For example, I'm sitting on a sofa. I'm sitting in a certain direction. I have a certain weight. I have a certain number of hairs on my head. My eyes are open. Now they're closed. I was sitting. Now I'm standing. My legs were bent. Now they're straight. If I compare the properties of Jared at time t and some later time t2, the properties are not all going to be the same. Change has happened. I was straight, now I'm bent. I was sitting, now I'm standing. I had X number of hairs, now I have X minus 2 number of hairs. So I've undergone change, and according to the identity of indiscernibles, or Leibniz's law, I'm no longer the same thing as I was before. So have I become something different? Have I become something different in the same way that the clay became different when the Abraham Lincoln bust went out of existence and the vase came into existence, or when the chicken was cooked? Now, some philosophers have seen this as an aporia, that there must be something wrong. Now, of course, Leibniz stated this law far after the pre-Socratics, which we're going to be reading. But there's an insight that they have that's sort of similar. They recognized the problem of change and identity. So Heraclitus famously states that you never step into the same river twice, because he saw the universe in constant flux. Change means that something is different. It's not the same thing as it was before. And all things change. Now, Heraclitus has an interesting theory about what brings about that change. And essentially, it's love and strife, as you'll certainly learn. So, the entire world is constantly changing. So, if I think that I am the same person that I was yesterday, I'm making a mistake. I'm being deceived by the amount of similarities between myself today and myself yesterday, and I'm confused. I think that I am the same person when in actuality I'm not. Just like every time I drive over the Kentucky River, I think that that's the same river when in actuality it is not. Now, on the other hand, another pre-Socratic philosopher, Parmenides, rejects this idea that things are constantly in change, and in fact argues that change is all an illusion. In fact, for something to be true, it must be changeless. And given that there is truth in the world, there must be changelessness in the world. Now, how Parmenides works out this particular argument is a bit complicated, and we'll discuss it more in class. But it's very interesting that given the single problem, the problem of change and the problem of identity, we have two philosophers living in proximity to each other, both in terms of place and time, that develop two very different answers to the same problem.